so you can kind of blame me for much of the information here, although it has been very much a team effort. I shall pass to the next person on the screen, Clearna.
Hi, I'm Clearna O'Neill. I'm Head of Quality and Continuous Improvement at Medr.
So, Gail.
Hi everyone, I'm Gail. I'm Head of Sustainability and Assurance at Medr. So my team is responsible for the governance and management, including financial management condition, as well as running the sort of sector-wide assurance processes you've seen in the consultation. So things like the annual assurance return and provider engagement.
Andrew.
Hi everyone, I'm Andrew Pickford. I'm the Senior Regulation Manager for Medr.
Kieran.
Hi all, I'm Kieran Rees, I'm Director of Learner Experience at Medr.
Sam.
Hi, so I'm Sam and I am the holder of the Equality of Opportunity condition, and then in the team that I sit in we also have the staff and learner welfare condition as well.
And Marion.
Everyone knows me. I'm Head of Learner and Workforce Engagement in Medr. My team's responsible for the Learner Engagement Code and also the Complaints Condition.
Okay. Lisa.
Hi, afternoon everybody. Apologies, I am just trying to help John Nash get into the meeting, so that's why I was slightly late. So John will be joining us as soon as he can. But Lisa Mitten, and like Marion, we've known each other for a long time. Strategic Director, NTfW. Nice to see you all.
Thank you, Lisa. Gareth.
Gareth, Director at iTech.
And Grant.
Grant Santos, Chief Exec at Educate Training Group.
And John, welcome. We're just doing some introductions. So can you just introduce yourself? Sorry.
Certainly, yeah. Sorry, I'm slightly late. Problems connecting. John Nash, TSW Training Director and currently Chair of NTfW.
Well, welcome. Thank you for coming. So.
Apologies. I had late apologies from Richard Spear of ACT. He's had an emergency he's had to attend to, unfortunately, and Sarah John is on annual leave, so apologies from our colleagues there. And also similarly, I don't know if Faith has already explained, but Angela Maguire is unwell and unable to attend.
And Faith is on the call.
Thank you. I mean, this is being recorded, so assuming everyone's happy with that, so we can make this available clearly to colleagues who can't make it today. But and if there are any follow-up questions, more than happy to engage with people individually. Although the diaries are looking a bit crazy, but depending on what it is, I'm sure we can fit people in for a quick chat if needed over the next week or so. So more than happy to do that if needed.
Ewan, just hello. I don't know if I'm on your screen. I may be hidden behind many screens there.
Sorry, Faith.
That's okay. Pranam Da. My name's Faith.
You've just appeared actually on my screen, bizarrely.
My name's Faith O'Brien. I'm the Managing Director of Cambrian Training. And again, Angela's given her apologies. She was due to attend, but we came home late from Mid Wales last night, and I think she's got a bit of a migraine, so she's not able to attend.
Thank you, and massive apologies for not bringing you in before, Faith. Sorry, my screen's kind of all moved around a bit, so I don't know what's going on there. But good to see you. Thank you for coming. So we just wanted to sort of start off really with giving a bit of an overview of the consultation, if that's okay, and the kind of timelines. And there's sort of some specific aspects actually related to apprenticeship providers, which we need to sort of just touch on in that. I'm assuming you've all seen the consultation documents and the associated survey. Would I be right in that? Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, clearly within that, you've got an overall consultation document which sets out the questions which we're asking for answers to. We would appreciate it if people, if they can use the online survey, that would be great. Really, just from the point of view, it just makes it so much easier to collate stuff. Because if it's anything like the last consultation, we had around about 120 responses. So it does make it much easier to respond and to, in terms of collating it actually, so we can actually pull it together really quickly because we are working to an exceptionally tight time scale. in terms of
just to say about
Sorry.
the online survey, it's actually down today.
Oh,
Yes. But
Okay.
it was an hour ago anyway.
right. Okay, we will take that one away with us and raise it with the people in question. So I don't know what's happened there. Shouldn't be down, but
We
Okay.
have had one or two instances of it going down, but it's been part of wider sort of internet kind of meltdowns. But we'll check on it and come back to you.
thank you actually for bringing that to our attention. That's really, really helpful. If I just give a sort of a quick overview then of the kind of the consultation and the timescales, and then we can go on then and talk a bit more about the individual conditions and have a proper bit of a chat about those, if that would be helpful. In
Yeah,
terms
thanks,
of
Stephen.
So in terms of the documents which we're covering, the key one, I think, clearly is the regulatory framework that sets out, how we intend to operate as a regulator. It sets out kind of then how that flows through into how we intend to monitor as a regulator, and God forbid if we ever had to intervene as a regulator. And it sets out the requirements, through the conditions of funding. Now, in terms of apprenticeship providers, the full range of conditions of funding apply to you. So that really, I mean, the only bits of the framework which don't apply to you are those which apply purely to registered higher education providers, which clearly, not relevant to yourselves. So as well as the framework, we also have the quality framework, which sets out the kind of the principles in respect of quality, which we which underpin really the quality condition. So that framework is, I mean, we've made significant changes actually to that on the back of feedback from the original version that people would have seen in the first consultation. So that framework now is cast as guidance, and yeah, so basically that underpins the condition which sets out the requirements. Just actually, before I forget them, the regulatory framework itself, you'll have seen in the first consultation parts of it. So this is the full version. So it's all the conditions. Today we don't intend to sort of go over too much those conditions which we covered in the last consultation, but just to say that we have made changes to pretty much every condition on the back of feedback we had from the first consultation. And one of the biggest things we had by way of feedback actually was kind of the whole regulatory burden piece, and we've kind of looked at that, and whether we're quite there, I don't know, but certainly we've pulled back in quite a range of areas from what we originally put in there. There's been a few areas where we had a bit of a debate, and actually we were challenged by our own board about maybe pulling back too far in some areas, and kind of the pendulum's gone backwards and forwards a little bit. But actually, I think overall, the kind of level of burden, the kind of expectations in terms of submissions and monitoring and what have you has changed quite a lot from what was the original one. But as I say, it still may not quite be there. And there's an awful lot of practical implications. Once this whole framework is kind of finalized, there's some practical implications about monitoring, which we'll need to discuss with different types of providers. As we can talk about annual assurance returns, but what does that actually mean for different types of providers, and what does it look exactly the same for different types of providers? And almost certainly not, I would say. So there's kind of a bit of co-creation then needed about the practicalities of how it works on the ground. So that's kind of going to be something I think we'll want to work with people on over the next few months. But we've got to get this framework bottomed out first to actually then have kind of that there, so we know what we're working with. So as well as the regulatory framework and the quality framework, there's also the learner engagement code, which is actually a really critical piece, and that's kind of cast as principles. Colleagues will talk a bit more about that later, but that is a key document, and that's the first time you'll have seen that. And then the other kind of key regulatory document which is in the pack is our statement of intervention powers. That is basically it's a statutory document we have to produce. It's a requirement of the Act. So it really just sets out what the Act says. in slightly less legal language. Really, it's if I think back historically, the higher education sector in Wales has currently got an equivalent document, which looks very similar actually to this. Never been used as, we've never had to use those formal intervention powers, and so I would be hopeful that, I would see it personally as a failure as a regulator if we're kind of taking, issuing directions and things like this. I mean, it's just the kind of space we don't want to be in, but we've got those tools if we need them. I think as a regulator, I think we're very clear in terms of the regulatory approach we've set out in the regulatory framework, that we kind of want to be collaborative. We want to kind of be a learning organization, and we're not going to get things right the first time, clearly. And same with providers. We're kind of all here to learn and improve. So I think that what we're looking for is a kind of a mature relationship, a kind of culture of openness and no surprises, where if there's an issue, come and have a conversation and we kind of can work together to deal with it, rather than kind of the kind of regulatory relationship that I think certain kind of related sectors in other parts of the UK have had, where something happens and then kind of legal letters start flying. I mean, that's really not the territory you want to be in. But just to say, we have to have that document, so that's why it's there. Don't read into the fact we have a document like that, but it means we're going to act in that way. It's there because we have to have it. But who knows? We may need it at some point when something really serious goes wrong somewhere, and it's there as a tool in the box. As well as those sort of regulatory documents, there's a kind of a frequently asked questions and a glossary of terms, because like everyone seems to use different terms for different things. So we've kind of tried to explain what we mean by when we say particular things. That frequently asked questions is almost certainly not exhaustive. Throughout the engagement we've had over the last couple of weeks or so, there've been other questions people have picked up, and I think a lot of that can then be fed in, and we'll expand on those FAQs over time. And I think probably it'll be something which will sit on our website, on an ongoing basis, and probably get refreshed every so often, because, it's just helpful to have that, rather than, because if you don't keep it there, then you have to reinvent it every time someone asks a question. So we'll try and build on that. And alongside that, clearly in the sort of medium term, there's probably all sorts of guidance we want to put out as well. But we just don't have the bandwidth to do it all at once, so that will follow, I think. So those are the documents. In terms of the timeline, the closing date for the consultation is the 17th, so you've got kind of about a week and a half basically left. Now that timeline is tight, I know that. I mean, it'll be an 8-week consultation. But we have to see that against the backdrop of the kind of overall timescale for the project to deliver the new system. So effectively, we will have to review the consultation responses starting probably just before Christmas, but really more in early January. And then we will need to make changes probably in the second half of January, early February. So we've got about a month or so to make changes, I would say. I mean, there might be a bit of to and fro on that, but not long. And then we are into the territory then of getting approvals within Medr, and we have to have final sign off of the kind of final version of the regulatory framework and other documents by our board meeting in sort of mid-March. And the reason for that timescale being so tight is that effectively we have drafted the conditions of funding as a single set of conditions with the conditions of registration for higher education providers. So we have a single regulatory framework for the whole tertiary sector, and that's been quite purposeful, really. That what we didn't want is sort of basically building in silos right from the start. So we've adopted the approach of having a single set of conditions, although for some providers they apply as conditions of registration rather than conditions of funding, but they're effectively the same conditions in most cases. So the issue here we have here is that those providers who are going to register for higher education purposes will need to apply for registration, and that needs to happen in advance, effectively, of the next academic year. So basically, those providers will need to be on the HE register by 31st of July, ready for the new year starting in August. So that really has determined the timescale a bit, because we've got to get it all done to allow that time. But we've also got the balance that the kind of legislative powers, and when they come in, the power for us to actually publish our regulatory framework doesn't come in till early April. So I think it's something like the 6th of April. So effectively that's Easter Monday, I think. So we aren't going to be publishing on Easter Monday. So I think realistically it'll probably be a week or so after that. So mid-April we'll be publishing the regulatory framework. And then for those higher education providers who need to apply for registration, they'll then have the opportunity to apply. So that kind of dictates the timescale, and we kind of work back from there, really. Yeah, just say alongside that, there's all sorts of stuff with kind of bits of secondary legislation coming in, which are kind of with Welsh Government, and they're on the case with that. But it is a very, very tight timescale all around. So we are currently obviously consulting. We're also consulting with our lawyers on the kind of the documents, and there may well be changes we need to make on the back of kind of legal advice. But I'm very clear we need to have effectively the final version pretty much there by, I'd say, middle of February-ish. Maybe a few tweaks beyond that, but by and large we need to be there by then, ready that we can kind of put it through our internal processes and get final sign off, get it all translated and everything as well. And that in itself is actually quite a major job. And I know we've already got it all translated now, but actually, depending on how many tweaks you make to something, sometimes it's actually easier to just go back to square one and translate the whole document from scratch. So we'll see where we end up with what we get in terms of feedback. So that's the timeline. Are there any sort of questions on any of that? But there's one specific point I wanted to touch on, but before I do that, any kind of general questions? No? Okay, so the specific point is for everyone else, the new conditions of terms and conditions of funding come in from the 1st of August 2026. Clearly, you are contracted under the existing arrangements till I think it's 31st of July 2027. So we would not be looking to bring in the new terms and conditions of funding for apprenticeship provision until 1st of August 2027. Now, there is a potential fly in the ointment there. We need to do that, to have that delay. We would need to get whatever funding letters we get put out before the new powers come in from April next year. So we'd have to get our funding letters out before Easter, basically. And forgive me, I don't precisely know the kind of process in terms of funding, how we communicate stuff to you, but that would all need to be wrapped up by then. Now, if there were to be a further kind of supplementary round of additional funding during the year, any kind of, we've got to work out how we kind of square that, because basically, if we were to announce apprenticeship funding after that April start date, that basically triggers the fact we have to use the new terms and conditions of the funding. So there's a question there for our lawyers about how we can get around that, because we obviously don't want to bring that in and kind of cause all sorts of issues alongside the contract, which is there. So there's a kind of a question with our lawyers about how we can handle all of that. I mean, I don't think we need to concern you with it too much, but we will try and sort it, basically. But unfortunately, the way way the legislation is written, it sometimes doesn't make it easy. So there's kind of a bit of finessing we need to do in that space. I just wanted to mention that. I don't know, Medr colleagues got anything else on kind of timings or anything they wanted to raise? No. Okay. If you're okay, then could we move on to talk about the conditions? And I was going to focus on those conditions which are in the current consultation. I mean, I know the whole regulatory framework is there, but the ones which are there for the first time, which you've not seen before. and if it's okay, I'm going to pass over to my colleague Kieran Rees in a minute. But if I just kick off with the first one, just to make it tidier while I'm talking. There is a condition there which is around information, assistance and access. Now, this is kind of boilerplate stuff, really. It's about submission of data for monitoring purposes. It's about kind of, so that's the information bit, really. Kind of, we ask for some information, we ask that people provide it. Basically, you kind of cooperate. There's a bit there about assistance and access, and that that would kind of be, you could read for that sort of when Estin come in or whatever, you've got to kind of work with them, or or if we need to come in and do something else for whatever reason, if we need auditors to come and look at something, that you cooperate with them. So it's kind of standard stuff, and I think that's probably something similar would probably be in our kind of current conditions, which you're working to anyway. I mean, I think. So it's not really anything new, but it's there basically, and if for whatever reason we need to do a data audit or whatever, that you kind of provide what we ask for, and or not just us, the kind of people who are working for us, so any auditors or, as I say, Estin or whoever. So that's what that is about. And in terms of sort of any kind of monitoring requirements on that, well, there aren't any really. So clearly, if a provider doesn't provide data, or doesn't let people in to look at something when they need to go in and look at something, and that's the monitoring basically. So there's no kind of need for any kind of return or anything, although that I can't remember, there might be a statement in our annual assurance return or anything, but I mean, it's kind of, it'll just be a line. There's no actual need to submit anything or provide anything in that space. So it actually, in terms of kind of burden, that particular condition doesn't really provide any, and actually it's kind of what would already be happening anyway. So it's nothing new. So that's the only one I wanted to focus on. And was there any questions on that? And people have looked at the regulatory framework. Is there anything before I pass to Kieran?
Ewan, I don't think so. I think thank you for the update and just the reminder of the submission dates, etc. And also, I think Andrew's put an update in the chat that the online survey is now up and running again. So,
well, actually, one point on timing, just to mention. I mean, in terms of annual assurance returns, for everyone else, we're asking kind of a return sort of late 2027, but clearly for yourselves, if you're not going to be subject to the new conditions of funding till 27-28, it's going to be late 2028. So it's quite a bit of time between now and then. But clearly we would want to work with providers to make sure that kind of that process works for everyone and is kind of not overly burdensome. So I think that's probably an ongoing conversation, but once we've got this framework finalized, we can kind of pick that up, I think. October 28th, as Gail has put in the chat. Thank you for that. I'm going to pass over to Kieran, if that's okay, who's going to tell you about all the other conditions. Which
Ewan, apologies, Grant has got his hand up.
Oh, sorry, Grant. Yes.
That's right. Just a quick question, and it may not be a relevant question, but in terms of, you mentioned earlier about funding having to be announced prior to April next year, because of the condition, with potential changes politically that may happen the following month, how does that impact anything in that? Because obviously we've got the elections in May, and there may be changes in terms of priorities and so on and so forth, and potential funding towards tertiary education and apprenticeships. Is there any potential impact that could have as a result of those elections?
Kieran may want to jump in on this one, but if I just kick off and just say, I think the budget will obviously be hopefully signed off well before then. And if it doesn't, then we've got bigger problems, because then that has huge implications. If the government was to fall, would have huge implications actually for Senedd reorganisation, for example, because that would kick all that down the line for another 5 years. So because they'd be then having an election under the current system, not the new system. I don't think anyone is in the space of wanting to do that. I mean, I'm not a politician, and I don't kind of follow that closely, but I don't think we're in that space. So I would imagine, so my sense of what I've heard is the budget probably go through, there'll be deals done or whatever, So effectively, that means we can then finalise funding arrangements. So clearly, then there might be a new programme for government. Clearly, beyond that, and then we'll have to kind of pick that up down the line, I think. But we'll have to get out the funding based on what we know at that point in time. But Kieran, I don't know if you want to, or Marion, or anyone else want to come in on.
Yes, and it's a hypothetical question, isn't it? But just just okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I think in terms of it's obviously a broader kind of issue. If the Welsh Government budget were to be agreed, I think the entire public sector would be in a very challenging space. The indications we get is it's pretty unlikely at this moment, but I know conversations are ongoing to try and understand what the risks are and how to mitigate them.
Yeah, no, but it was certainly a very relevant question, actually, because there are so many unknowns at the moment. It's interesting times, I think, because in inverted commas. Okay, Kieran, can I pass over to you then? Is that okay?
Thanks, Ewan. Yeah, so I'm very conscious some of you will have been part of some of the other engagements we've had, so I'll try not to repeat myself in too much detail, but I'm also conscious that many of the sort of leads and these different areas of work are on the call as well. So I think as we get into more of a discussion, I think the experts are here to kind of engage in more of that detail. I'm going to run through the new conditions, but I think something that has also been touched on briefly gives them the context around where we are with quality, which I think is obviously an area that will be of interest too. So as Ewan set out, the second phase of the consultation provides the broad overview, provides the full picture of the proposed regulatory system, including, I think, what is our main vehicle for assuring quality in the future, which will be our condition on quality and continuous improvement, which does require providers who are subject to those terms and conditions to demonstrate good quality. What the condition sets out is a range, the ways in which we will seek to understand and monitor quality. The three big kind of areas being, of course, as you'd expect, ESTIN inspection and QAA review, the use of data, and then wider intelligence and information as well. The other thing that's wrapped up in the consultation that relates to the quality condition is our quality framework, which is intended to provide guidance on policy and practice in relation to the condition. So it sets out different ways in which you could demonstrate good quality through what you do, and that will subsequently, I think, inform the quality framework will subsequently in future inform some of ESTIN's engagement with providers as well. I'm sure you may have some specific questions on that, but I'll sort of talk through some of the other conditions that we're consulting on, and then we can kind of have a wide-ranging discussion with some of my colleagues who are on the line. There's a couple of, across the rest of the conditions, I think there's a couple of common themes. They're all sort of, in one way or another, the result of what's required of Medr through the legislation. Sorry, I got distracted by Leo's message about the door. They're all in some part around what's required through the legislation. They also have some common themes, which I'll sort of unpick as we're talking through. I think the first one I'm going to flag is the equality of opportunity condition, and this is where the legislation requires us to put in place the requirement for providers to deliver measurable outcomes that relate to certain groups, certain underrepresented groups, in terms of participation, retention, completion, and then also attainment gaps for those where the gaps arise as a result of socio-economic, cultural, or other factors. At the heart of that condition is the requirement for a provider to set measurable outcomes, and then I got it the wrong way around, to carry out self-evaluation. And I think, as you'll hear the case across many of these conditions, the requirement to have a self-evaluation is a common one. And one of the things we're clear is where you already have self-evaluation approaches in providers, we're perfectly happy for that the self-evaluation we require to be built into the existing approaches. It's not about creating something new. So in terms of the equality of opportunity condition, we'd expect self-evaluation and then setting some measurable outcomes over a multi-year horizon. And we'd want to know what those measurable outcomes were, and then we'd expect routine updates as part of your annual assurance return. I think structured somewhat similarly, and also a requirement of the legislation, is our staff and learner welfare condition. So the legislation requires us to be satisfied to the effectiveness of arrangements for supporting learners and staff. How we intend to do that in the condition is through essentially a kind of a two-stage process, which is where providers undertake a self-evaluation to look at where their risk areas are in terms of welfare, what possible gaps might be, where the opportunities for improvement might be, and then to go through a succinct process of priority setting to produce a focused action plan on how they're going to address those risks. Now, in terms of the self-evaluation, again, we'd expect that to be something you can build into existing processes. We don't want to see it. It's not something we'd routinely expect to be submitted to us, but we would expect the action plan to be shared with us, not for approval, just so that the provider can demonstrate compliance with the conditions so that we can understand the different types of activities, challenges, issues that people are grappling with, so that that can then also inform our policy and practice. Some of the other areas that are set out, one is the Learner Engagement Code, which is something, again, there's some repetition here set out in the legislation. And I think upfront with the Learner Engagement Code, I need to be clear about this sort of definition of learner engagement, because I think instinctively many people might think of engagement in teaching and learning, for example. What the Act describes as learner engagement is involvement in decision making. And what the Learner Engagement Code attempts to do through a set of principles is, in a way that works across the whole of tertiary, establish what might be the common expectations of learners in relation to their opportunities for being involved in decision making. The condition that's set out in the regulatory framework essentially requires compliance with the Learner Engagement Code principles, and then asks providers to provide succinct evidence as part of their annual assurance return of what the impact of that learner involvement in decision making was, as well as any evidence on learners' experiences and perceptions of engagement in decision making. I think the team are particularly really interested in talking across the tertiary sector about the monitoring requirements there to really understand how it could work and how we can pitch it the most applicable, relevant way. We're nearly there. We've got a couple left to go. A relatively straightforward one is complaints. So we have a duty to require providers to have a complaints process in place and to publicise that complaints process. So our condition effectively reflects that duty and requires providers to have a complaints process for learners and to publicise that complaints process. Another area set out in the legislation is the learner protection plans. So we've gone on quite a journey with this, because I think there's different ways of approaching learner protection plans. And when you look at different sectors in other parts of the UK, often they've taken the approach of requiring providers to hypothetically set out different scenarios that might arise and what the provider would do in those circumstances. This is specifically in relation to existing learners who, due to a change or some other issue that arises, might not be able to complete the course or achieve the learning outcomes that were originally intended to be achieved, possibly as a result of provider decision making, possibly as a result of things such as issues with campuses, staff leaving, things like that. We've taken quite a different approach to what I think we've seen elsewhere in the UK, in that as a routine, we are not going to be asking for the submission of learner protection plans. Instead, what we set out in the consultation is the types of circumstances in which we may have a learner protection interest, where we feel there may be a risk to learner protection. Our first step would always be to have a conversation with the provider and to understand from the provider what they've got in place, what plans they've got in place to protect that learner interest in terms of completing. we then will have the ability, if we feel it's necessary, to request a learner protection plan. And that's what we've set out in the guidance that we're consulting on. This is, I think it's worth clarifying, this is not learner protection in a welfare sense. It's in terms of the ability to successfully complete the course. So it's about if the provider's making big changes to course delivery, physical infrastructure, or other circumstances arise that might impact other circumstances in relation to the provider that might impact the learner's ability to complete the course. That's the sort of type of area that's captured by learner protection. And then the other condition that's in the consultation is on Welsh language. And I think one of the things we've had to do in this space is we have a duty to promote the Welsh language, and we also have a legal responsibility to take all reasonable steps to ensure Welsh medium provision is available to those who wish to undertake it. We have to recognise the diversity of the tertiary sector and the fact that providers are in very different spaces. So I think the purpose of our Welsh language condition, first and foremost, is effectively to try and get the entire tertiary sector facing in the same direction. I think an underpinning principle is about trying to ensure some forward momentum, recognising that everyone is at a different starting point. To do that, the fundamental requirement of the Welsh language condition is a Welsh language strategy, where we'd be asking providers to set out how they will increase demand for participation in Welsh medium and how they will promote the use of Welsh across their provider. That obviously, in setting up strategy, we would expect all providers to reflect their own certain context, their demographics, their local environment they're in, because I think it will be highly diverse across Wales. And one of the things we are doing to support, I think, providers in that area is our work on the National Plan for Welsh, which is a commitment for us, and should help hopefully inform and support providers in their work as part of that regulatory requirement. So I think in terms of the second consultation and this area of work, we've restated the quality condition and the quality framework. We've also and made some amendments in response to feedback in those areas. And then we've also set up those 6 new, for this consultation, conditions, all of which relate to our statutory and legislative requirements around equality of opportunity, welfare, learner engagement code, learner protection plans, Welsh, and complaints. As I said, we're joined on the call by all the people at Medr who lead on this work, who can engage in a level of detail, I suppose, in any questions that you have. So I have to take any questions, or I don't know, Ewan, how you want to handle the next sort of item.
I think just like to just open it up for questions, really, and then we'll move on in a bit to talk about monitoring and kind of any operational implications. But I think actually let's open it now for questions and discussion about the individual conditions. Lisa, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks, Kieran. I think inevitably an observation for you. Reassuringly, the majority of these conditions, the providers, they're already in place, albeit they will be enhanced to a certain level, etc. But I think that is reassuring, because I think inevitably, initially, there was a little bit of nervousness around reinventing the wheel. But Cleona's just reminded me, of course, that we've got a member of the board, Angela Maguire-Lewis, who's sitting with you guys and Estyn and doing a task and finish group on self-evaluation to strengthen that across the network as well, which is always welcomed. And then, learner welfare, learner journey, as we commonly call it, etc. So that equality and Welsh language, is nothing scary, because it's something that we've always done as additionality, if you like, to support the learners throughout their apprenticeship programme. I did attend the apprenticeship advisory group, obviously, with a colleague recently. So that's a good network for us when we're talking about Welsh language. We were talking about Llywr codes recently. I tend not to get involved in the operational detail, but I went there really as strategic director, just so that we could make sure that we're all sort of, using the same narrative and looking at the same thing. So that's really useful to know. And then I think just for me, just to share with you guys, I'm sure you're already aware anyway, you know, Marion has been really supportive when we've talked about digital, when we've talked about ITPs and us needing that parity. I need to think of a new word. I've used it for far too long. I need to think of a new word. So feeling very supportive in that sort of element as well. And then I think when we're talking about learner welfare, etc., that's an element where, especially for ITPs, they've invested heavily over a number of years, but certainly in the last couple of years where we've seen that sad rise really with mental health and wellbeing concerns for a number of our learners, not just our younger generation, but a number of our learners. So they've invested heavily in that. So inevitably, just to share with you guys that when I'm talking to obviously Heather and Jeff Hicks and the team, etc., that is something that I'm bringing up because, you know, sometimes there's a little bit of disparity around funding and support for those. And that's why I just wanted to give a nod really to Marion as far as the digital element, because that was well understood and supported from there. And obviously we have the additional JISC support, etc. So very much appreciated. Not necessarily a question, but I just wanted to share that information with you guys because I think, you know, that helps us as far as the second part of the regulation consultation is concerned. That said, I'll leave it open now. I can see Cleona wants to come in, but I'll leave it open to my colleagues who really are, you know, working on the shop floor type of thing as well, and may want to add to some of the points that Kieran has just made. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to note that we're meeting termly with Becky from ACT. And that's very helpful in terms of making sure that they're aware of the bits that we're working on and we're aware of your priorities and so on. We've also, for the first time, funded a joint meeting between the Apprenticeship Network and the Degree Apprenticeship Network to try and get conversation going. I think because it was organised sort of about 2-3 months ahead of time, there was challenges with diaries and getting a full day slot, but provided the chairs of the network are happy that it was a useful thing to do, we propose to get something into the diary early for next year so that more people can attend, they can have sort of closer to a full day, etc. So any thoughts you have on that would be useful, but we're really just trying to make those connections where we can. And I gather from my colleague Beth, who attended on behalf of the quality team, the degree apprenticeship people hadn't been aware of the full breadth and extent of the apprenticeship programs and so on. So they found it very useful in terms of sharing practice. And I think we can build on that in the future. Thanks.
Yeah. Ewan, can I just come in there? Thank you, Cleona, so much. And I'm just reminded as well that this was sort of a thought process I had recently, because inevitably, you know, just sort of sitting beneath NTfW and with our board members, you know, I'm very fortunate that a lot of those then have staff who reach out and do this, like Angela doing the self-evaluation stuff and Becky, etc. And we've got, you know, others who are doing the Welsh, etc. It's bringing that information together. So I reached out to Rhian and Heather in the team as well and said, look, you know, we've got our NTfW conference in March, slightly going off on a tangent, but it'll bring it back even in a second to this consultation. But we've got our NTfW conference in March. Why doesn't Medr have a workshop there where you can share really all of the stuff that we're collectively doing together? So Marianne and I, you know, we do the trade union stuff, don't we, Marianne? The digital, Cleona with the quality, etc., and all these other weird and wonderful things, micro credentials and so on. There's so much on the agenda and your guys' plates at the moment that is supporting the network, and we're, you know, conversely having that conversation with you, that we're going to be having that workshop in the conference so we can share exactly what's happening out there to all of our members and the wider network as well. So Ewan, apologies, just thought it was worth mentioning that then as well, and opening it back up to the floor then to any other colleagues.
No, that's really, really helpful, Lisa. Yeah, so any other questions?
No, it's not a question, Ewan. What I've done is I've just put something in the chat, which from ITech's perspective, I think most of what we're hearing, you know, we're supportive of, but sometimes the language is not inclusive of apprenticeships and independent training providers. So I've just given an example there, particularly around the learner engagements. You know, we don't have a campus, we don't have a students' union. Our learners are spread over multiple employers, work different shift patterns and so forth. So it's contextualizing the environment in which we deliver in, really. And I've just given an example as some of the feedback we will be providing.
No, that's helpful. I mean, I think there's some general points about kind of wording, and there's some tidying up to do actually of all the documents. I mean, we've had some feedback already on that. So yeah, we can kind of do a sense check, I think, probably of all these documents for, how do they come across with, other providers such as yourself. So yeah, we can look at that, I'm sure. So that's really, really helpful feedback. Maren, you got your hand up. Sorry, you're on mute.
Realised it as I started. Just to come in on that particular point, Gareth, about the learner engagement code. Yeah. We're walking a bit of a line here, of course, because the code has got to apply across the whole of the tertiary sector. So, of course, there's a multitude of different settings and types of learner and providers and terminologies that are used. We are a little bit, I think, trying to strike a balance where we've got challenges on both sides. So I can tell you that in talking to HE students' unions, the first thing they've said to us is, there's not enough in there about students' unions. Why aren't you using it to solidify the position of students' unions? What we've attempted to do in the code is make it so that the overarching language, particularly the principles, which are the kind of key sort of cross-cutting requirements of the code, are generic and work for every setting. We have given examples in there, though, that do come from different settings. So there are examples in there that talk about students' unions, talk about school councils, talk about course representatives, student governors, all sorts of different things, because we're trying to illustrate the range and variety that is appropriate and can all be used to meet the requirements. We're quite keen to build up more examples and more real life case studies. So I think particularly for sectors where maybe we've got less information currently on what good practice is, we're quite keen to engage with you to build up more information there. So yes, I agree with you about the examples, but we need to get them from somewhere, so we can engage with you in the network to perhaps help generate more of that. And if anybody wants to flag up possible examples or case studies in their responses, that would be really helpful for us to just build up that holistic picture of the really wide range of ways in which learner engagement can be done effectively.
Okay.
Gareth, has that kind of answered your?
It does, and look, I don't envy you the task that you have before you, to be quite honest, across a wide spread. But it's just, as I think Marion was saying, it's just getting that balance right. And at this point in time, my interpretation, it's a little bit still slanted away to FE, HE, and so forth, as opposed to from the apprenticeship perspective. But I accept there's a balance to be struck here.
That's helpful. Faith. Sorry, you're on mute, actually.
Yes, I am. Sorry. I suppose I'm following on from what Gareth said and Marion. My concern is that there's no mention, especially with apprenticeships, and I don't know how you can do it with employers. They are so important to us in terms of the welfare of the learner and that side of it, and the responsibility of the employer, the accountability of the employer bleeds through a lot of these conditions. And there's just no mention there. Again, I don't know how you would manage to do that, but it is really important. In reality, potentially we would only see a learner once every 2 months for the rest of the time they're employed.
Yeah.
So how that equates to somebody on an FE and a HE course going in every single day or 5 times a day, 5 times a week, that must be very difficult to balance, but it doesn't come to any of the conditions at all.
I mean, it might also apply to FE and HE where they have work placements potentially. So, I mean, it may not just be a thing for apprenticeship providers, actually. So I'm going to think of doing a degree with a sandwich placement, for example.
There's a significant difference between an employed individual and somebody on a work placement in terms of health and safety, welfare responsibilities, safeguarding responsibilities. It's fairly significant.
Yeah. Okay, we can take that one away. But I mean, yeah, please, in your response, happy for you to feed all this back. It's all helpful.
Definitely. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, if not, can we move on to the next thing we had on the agenda was to talk about monitoring and operational implications. If I just say a few words about the kind of intentions in respect of monitoring, and it is our intention to be a proportionate and risk-based regulator. So some of the points which I think have already been made about not necessarily asking for information to be submitted to us. I think we for the first iteration of the regulatory framework and kind of some of the requirements and some of the conditions, we've certainly pulled back quite a bit. And as I say, I don't know whether we've got to the kind of the sweet spot yet. There might still be a bit of movement needed there. So please, if you think it is overly burdensome in some areas, let us know. Now, there is obviously a balance we have to tread in, that we have to give assurance to ministers. We've got certain kind of statutory duties on us as a regulator. So, we might not end up in a position where everyone's totally happy with that, just by the nature of it. That's how regulation works, unfortunately. But we certainly will look at any comments you've got in that space and give it serious consideration. What I would say is in terms of risk, I think the way we've kind of focused on different conditions and requirements of different conditions has sort of taken account of kind of the level of risk which you might imagine would be related to a condition. And the obvious example is, I don't know, financial sustainability, where actually a provider being sustainable and actually continuing to operate is pretty much I would say the kind of biggest risk, really, because if provider isn't sustainable, then none of the other stuff which a provider does can happen. So it is pretty much existential. So the degree of monitoring, the degree of engagement we may have with providers will clearly link with that kind of sense of risk and impact of a condition. So you would imagine that the kind of the impact on public funds, the impact on learners, clearly important, and I suppose reputation of the sector as well would be important. So all things to think about when we kind of to think about the sort of scaling of our engagement on various conditions, and that's why there are some conditions which don't ask so much, and there are some which ask for a lot more. So in terms of the mechanisms about how we're going to monitor, we've already talked about the annual assurance return being a key route. Really, there has to be kind of like a sort of a central return, and this is as good as any as a route to do it. So basically try and get as much information as we can through something which is relatively light touch, actually, but kind of covers all the kind of angles, and then where needed, sort of supplementary information to evidence. But as I said, depends on the condition really as to whether we need more or not. Clearly, we are trying to put as much emphasis on providers themselves to kind of self-assure, really, and hence the sort of self-evaluation piece is critical as part of that. And then alongside that, of course, we've got external assurance from Estin, for example, and potentially audit, data audit, and other kind of things which you might need potentially there. So there'll be sort of other sort of independent sources of assurance which we will tap into, and then there's obviously kind of data as well. Data returns are kind of the kind of data from SLUR, for example, and so on. So we can kind of look at kind of direction of travel in terms of the data. And one thing we are working on as an organisation, I think we've committed to kind of looking at measures, and we're trying to find a sort of a consistent set of measures which we can use across the sector. The tertiary sector as a whole might need to vary slightly between different types of providers, but kind of we want to get to a position whereby, you know, we can kind of look at the same kinds of things right throughout learners' journeys. From, you know, throughout, if people progress onto other things, we can kind of look at, if you think about equality of opportunity, you know, you can kind of look at where people drop out, for example, and kind of, are there any barriers there? So the whole sort of data piece is going to be quite important, I think, in this. But that's kind of a longer term thing, but certainly that will be part of the monitoring, and it won't necessarily be, you know, obviously you have to submit the data you have to submit, and kind of that will be what we monitor. I mean, there won't be any kind of additional stuff I think we're looking at. Engagement with providers forms part of our monitoring processes, so our kind of routine conversations with you will form part of it as well. And then of course, you know, there are issues like complaints from learners, which are, you know, part of that. There will be the potential that we can receive certain complaints from learners where it links to a regulatory compliance issue. You know, if we're talking about academic kind of complaints where really it has to come to you and go through due process, you've got your own complaints process. There's a requirement, obviously, as a condition to have your own complaints process. So you know, that's one for yourselves, but kind of potentially there are areas, you know, where we to get complaints which actually touch on regulatory compliance, we can receive those directly. But you know, really, I mean, I think our kind of experience so far, and we've had a lot of this with the HE sector over the number of years, and kind of to a lesser extent with FE, but actually most complaints when you come into you are not really, even if people try and pigeonhole them into a kind of a regulatory compliance issue, generally speaking they're not. They're usually academic or kind of other kind of sort of other kind of welfare issues or something which potentially fall outside of our remit. So I mean, and we would always just pass it back to the provider then if that was the case. So complaints can form one route of kind of being able to get real-time information, and then the other one, of course, is if you yourselves report stuff to us in real time, you know, kind of something's gone wrong and you need to tell us, and I think the key kind of, this is where our kind of regulatory relationship comes in. The key thing is that we'd rather you told us stuff and, you know, kind of work together to resolve it, rather than kind of finding out afterwards and then kind of having to sort of do some sort of intervention or something, where we don't really want to do that. We'd rather people just work proactively to resolve it and have that kind of mature, sensible adult relationship where we can kind of work together, and you know, if there's a problem, and so be it. Things happen at the end of the day. Gail is scarred by the sort of stacks of kind of incident reports which we've had over the years on kind of mainly HE, but kind of more recently FE, kind of things which go wrong. Things go wrong in any organization, and it's just a fact of life. And actually, having dealt with kind of university complaints and the Charity Commission, because of course universities are in Wales are registered charities, the Charity Commission actually started getting quite stroppy when no one was reporting complaints. No one was reporting issues. So they basically say, well, there must be issues. You obviously, your processes aren't very good because we're not hearing about anything. And when we worked with them and did a bit of digging, then we realised that actually stuff was happening, and basically it just wasn't being captured and reported properly. So yeah, things happen. I think that's the kind of the motto there, and you know, we'll just work with you to resolve them. So I think I'd always encourage you to kind of share and just have a conversation if you're unsure. So that's kind of a general point about reportable events. You know, if you're not clear, just have a conversation, and we'll kind of generally want to kind of help people, I think. So that's the kind of the processes which we use for monitoring. As I say, some of it's cyclical, some of it's kind of real-time stuff, but I don't think any of that is radically different to kind of stuff that you're probably used to anyway. So, I mean, I don't know if you've got any particular questions you want. I don't really think I had much more to say on
John has a question, Ewan.
Oh, sorry, John. Sorry, I didn't see your hand up. I'm slow on the draw today, clearly. So
it wasn't a question, really. It's an observation into
all of the great contributions this afternoon. I mean, what I would say is overall that no one is new to the business of delivery of apprenticeships, and the strength and depth of experience of all providers and the infrastructure that they're based on, I think is a very, very strong base to support everything that you're trying to achieve and the transition over to to Medr. I just think that we're in a very strong position to be able to support everything that you're trying to achieve with the survey and the transition. But the one point I would make is that what Faith said is no apprentice exists unless there's an employer. They have to be employed first, so they are an employee primarily. And I get that the wording has to strike a balance across the different deliveries of HE, FE, and apprenticeship, but apprentices are distinctly different in that respect. So I suppose the feedback that you're likely to get from us is going to incorporate that theme quite a bit.
That's fair enough. What I would say, John, is that I think we want to be pragmatic as a regulator, and we understand that there's a context to everything. And you could have learners who are performing very well, and then something goes wrong with the employer and kind of messes everything up. And we kind of context is absolutely critical in everything, because what we certainly don't want to do is just rely on data as a regulator, and kind of you've got to know the context. You can have very similar sets of data which could be good for one provider and bad for another, depending on the kind of context that they're working in. So and the kind of hand they're dealt with, the learners they're engaging with, could have very different profile of learners working with very different types of employers, or so I think it is context is key here. Clearly, though, direction of travel, if we were to see direction of travel with a provider was going the wrong way over a period of time, then clearly that's an issue. But if people are kind of doing their best and it's kind of heading more or less in the right direction, but stuff does go wrong, so I think we just have to be reasonable, and this is why kind of conversations are critical. And I hope we can kind of develop a relationship such that you trust us, you can come and have a conversation if things go wrong, because at the end of the day, I kind of mentioned before about our statement of intervention. We have intervention powers, but I really don't, they're kind of a last resort, really. And yes, we've got some lower level ones, but that might include, for example, providing advice and guidance, kind of which people have to give due regard to. But if we get to the stage of kind of writing to a provider to say, we're going to give you, or we're commissioning someone to do a review and they'll give you advice and guidance, we can just have that conversation before we get to that stage. So, I think that's kind of, it's a failure if you get to that kind of formal intervention kind of scenario. And as I said, we've not used it so far. I don't really want to start using it now. So, because we've got very similar powers currently for HE providers, and they just don't use them. We've done loads of intervention in kind of inverted commas, but not formal stuff. It's all been kind of working with providers, and as I say, things happen. It's just the way of the world, and it's just about working with people to resolve them as quickly as possible to everyone's benefit. But Faith. So you're on mute. Sorry.
It's Friday. I'm so sorry. Just a query, really. It's how you are thinking of balancing the power between being a regulatory body and a governance body. It's not usual practice to have the two bodies all in one. So you're having conversations about us approaching you and having sort of a relationship. How at what point are you going to wear which hat?
So when you say governance, you mean what? Sorry, just so I'm clear.
Just Medr generally. Sorry, Medr
Okay.
In terms of. Sorry, I'm not talking about the regulatory, but Medr as a body having both regulatory powers and general governance with Estin, etc. At what
Okay.
stage? What process do we go through to know what hat, who's wearing what hat?
Yeah, I think if we are going to come to you with a regulatory, I mean, transparency is one of our kind of key things. Okay, so let me be absolutely clear. If we're going to come to you with something which is regulatory, we will be clear that this is a regulatory thing. You know, this is what. Now, if it was a formal intervention, I mean, then there is a kind of a statutory requirement on us to say this is a thing under this section of the Act and you must comply or whatever. You know, so there's kind of a gradation really there. I mean, there's all sorts of engagement we will have just as engagement, you know, kind of sharing best practice, engaging with you, just meeting with you as we do to kind of find out how things are going. None of that is, I would say, it's not regulatory. I mean, it might inform, you know, kind of like part of monitoring, you know, general intelligence about what's going on in the world. But I don't think it's really, it's not regulatory in the sense that, you know, we're kind of telling you to do something or anything like that. If we are going to have kind of a conversation which is a regulatory conversation, I think it's on us to be absolutely crystal clear that even if it's not a formal intervention, we need to be clear that this is a regulatory one, and if we're giving you advice and guidance, you know, whether that's general for anyone or specific to a particular provider, if it's regulatory, we need to be clear that this is regulatory guidance and label it as such. So I think
how would that work vice versa then? So if we would, so again, a relationship is two-way. At some point, we would likely need to come to you, whether it would be for governance support or whether it's a regulatory intervention. How would we engage? We may have a completely different conversation with somebody where we're looking at governance versus regulatory framework.
Yeah, so I mean, I can only think of sort of analogies of what we've done in the past, and I know Gail, you might want to come in on this, but you know, we've had numerous conversations about kind of governance stuff with all sorts of providers, and you know, it's only if there's an issue it becomes a regulatory thing. Then I mean, it might be kind of, you know, I think we just need to be clear that, you know, kind of sharing best practice and kind of having a conversation is not, whilst it might inform regulatory practice, is not a regulatory conversation, if you know what I mean in that sense. But Gail, tell me if I'm wrong, because you're the person who has most of these conversations and how you handle it.
No, so we tend to have sort of, I think, a lot of sort of informal conversations around things that we are sort of sent. And the intention is obviously if we have concerns within an area, we don't just go off and take regulatory action in the governance space. We do sort of communicate with you much more formally. So what we're looking at doing, and it is outside of this consultation process, and it'll also come in a lot later for apprenticeship providers, is we have a risk process internally, and that will inform how often we have formal engagement with you on the conditions. And so you've kind of got the two sort of different heads. You've got the informal keeping in touch, you alerting us of things that may feed into our condition monitoring, but then you also have sort of that formal meetings or us sort of emailing or writing to you formally if we have concerns.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, it's about us being clear with you about which hat we've got on, and you know, whether we're just sort of, you know, just keeping in touch and trying to find out what's going on, you know, which might be relevant to regulatory compliance, but you know, it might be part of the monitoring, but it's not, you know, not necessarily the kind of formal, we need to meet to have a conversation about X because we've got concerns or something like that. Would be very, very clear if that was the case.
Yeah, it's just going to be interesting to see how it plays out, because in other bodies where I'm talking things like health and social care, where you potentially have governance and assurance under the same umbrella, and they're legally bound if you do have a conversation to start a procedure that has a significant impact, the relationship becomes detrimental and isn't a positive relationship. So it's just really interesting to see how it's actually going to move forward.
Can I just say as well, I mean, so Gail's team deals with assurance and governance issues, and kind of runs our kind of risk processes as well. We have a separate team. Andrew, you're on the call. Andrew's in the kind of that team which deals with kind of the kind of compliance end of the spectrum. I mean, not that we do much compliance other than kind of not in that space, not in terms of the formal intervention space, because it just doesn't happen. But in theory it can do. So there is we can kind of separate stuff out if we have to. It's just we've not really got into that. And to be honest, if we were getting into formal stuff, we'd be going through our board, we'd probably be taking legal advice, we'd be in a very different space to the kind of space that we want to have in terms of just a routine relationship with you. So yeah, I think the main thing is, let's solve stuff before it becomes a problem, and then no one has to worry about any of it. So I think that's the key thing. We just have a kind of a productive relationship, and then we can kind of sort stuff out as soon as possible.
Great, thank you.
So I mean, I think that just the key thing I wanted to highlight really is that we do intend to be kind of pragmatic, and so we're not. I mean, probably not. It's probably not an example that you're that familiar with, but if people in the kind of higher education sector and some FE as well will know about the Office for Students in England, the approach that they take to regulation, which is very, very different. And because they have such a large sector with so many providers, it's kind of a lot of it's based on data returns, and then kind of like, then suddenly you get a kind of a legal letter from them, because they're not happy with something. So very, very different approach. But I think if we get to that stage, we've failed, to be honest. That's not where I want to be. And I think hopefully our regulatory approach, because it's not just about individuals, who knows, I might retire one day, but whoever comes after me, unless we change our published approach, we're kind of be adopting the same way of working. So we've tried to kind of codify that so it's clear that we want to be kind of constructive, and we're a learning organization. I mean, that's the thing. One of our values is Dusky. We do want to kind of learn and develop, and we'll get stuff wrong, and I think we'll learn from you as much as you learn from us. So kind of it's a mutual thing, and hopefully I'll be honest. I mean, the regulatory framework as it stands now, what is implemented initially will not be the same one which is there in 2 or 3, 4, 5 years time. It will probably evolve because we'll learn stuff. There'll be some areas where we pull back. There'll be other areas where we have to ask for a bit more, and circumstances and the environment and kind of level of risk and all that will bear on that. So it will be an evolving picture, but certainly what I would say is if we do amend anything, we're absolutely clear we must consult. So nothing is going to change without kind of you being totally in the loop on that. So I'll just make that clear. Faith.
Sorry, I'm always very wonderful, but everybody's chuckling to themselves. But my other sort of main point I just wanted to raise was proportionality and the principles of proportionality. Obviously, on your condition, proportionality has a specific area that you're looking at. But when you look at proportionality and the burden that this regulatory framework gives to work-based learning providers compared to HE and FE, and the resources that HE and FE have at their disposal because of the funding that they get, it's not proportional to apprenticeships. Now, obviously, we're talking 2028. I'm not aware of what funding is going to look like or what the structure is going to look like, but it is a completely different picture within work-based learning. We do a lot of this, but not to the extent, I think, Lisa, that's actually in this regulatory framework. And however much I look at it and however much I say that we could look at our action plan and try and cross-reference that, all of that takes a significant amount of work. And there is a question mark around the amount of burden and proportionality, I think.
Yeah, that's a
fair point. I don't know if anybody else agrees, but...
Well, please feed that back. I mean, that's a valid point, and we'll take that one away. What I would say is, in terms of practical kind of implementation, this is obviously a framework, and the kind of what it looks like in an operational sense on the ground, we can work with you on that and try and make it as kind of low burden as possible, if you know what I mean. But clearly there's a level of ask, and if you think the level of ask is too much, then tell us.
So I was at the regulatory meeting in the south, I think it was Sam. Was I with you, Sam? Yeah. And we had quite a lot of FE on the table as well.
Yeah.
I think there was myself and one other work-based learning, and even the FE felt that it was very burdensome, the additional work, and they're familiar with a lot of these conditions and they work with these conditions, obviously not in this context, but FE felt that there was a significant burden. And then if you take that and actually ramp that up 100 times, that's where work-based learning is, and then that's where I think the proportionality comes into play.
Yeah. Okay, that's a fair point. And we've looked at it before, we can look at it again. So and we're meeting Cenedlaethol Cymru next week, I think, so I'm sure we'll get the same message from them. So it's fair enough. Yeah, please feedback, and if you think that's the case, say so, and we'll take a look at it. I mean, just to caveat that by saying that kind of we are in a position where there are certain things we have to do, if you know what I mean. So we've got to have a condition in the space. It's really then what does that condition look like and whether it satisfies. We're kind of walking a tightrope with some things in terms of Welsh Government's expectations and ministers' expectations and what have you. So yeah, we'll try and balance it as best we can. I think that's the key thing. And
hey, but looking at these conditions, I'll say, it's work-based learning. Generally, we do a lot of it. It's the expectation and what that brings to us from an administrative point of view. If we look at the administration layer within FE and HE, it's huge compared to where we're at with work-based learning.
Yeah. So Marion's put a point in the chat to that. Grant.
Yeah, Marion, I'll go through each condition. We've got work scenarios on each one, and also the amount of time required to get the condition up and running and in line with the regulatory framework. So yeah, we have that work.
That'll be helpful to feedback, Faith, actually. So in terms of us looking at it, we've got some concrete reasons rather than kind of we just don't like it. I mean, it adds more power, doesn't it?
Sorry, please don't take away that we don't like it. It's not that we don't like it. It's just the amount of work it's going to take to meet your expectations.
Sorry, forgive my kind of flippant thing. Sorry, this is regulation. I mean, no one likes regulation. Let's face it. Come on, it's kind of not. I mean, I do obviously because I work in it, but you know what I mean. It's kind of it's something which has to happen, but it's not something people would choose to have happen normally. I would say, unless you're a geek like me who's into it. But anyway, that's another thing. Grant.
Yeah, just building on the point from Faith. I think we spoke a couple of weeks ago. You were at the event in Cardiff that if we could get some sort of digital first processes in place that would help reduce some of this burden. Whether that's I don't know how at the moment these reporting requirements will play out on a day-to-day basis, and whether that's emails back and forth, if there's some sort of portal or a digital first solution to improve this, that would help. And what we are very good at then is innovating and being creative and building these requirements into our own processes, so that reduces the burden internally. And it happens as a natural course of what we do as organisations. So if we could do that, and it may help with some of Faith's examples on each measure, really, to see how that plays out. But I think if we can get a digital first solution to do this, then it would probably save not only us time, you guys a lot of time as well in terms of what you get through.
Yeah, and I think you've really just posed something there, which is kind of something which I know Gail and myself have talked about a lot, actually. So Gail, do you want to kind of come in there?
I was going to say, if you want to put that in your response, it would really help. But no, it's something we are really, really aware of within the assurance function. Obviously, we've come from an organisation where we only regulated 10 providers, so it was very email, very manual. I can't promise anything is going to be in place over the next few years. So it is going to remain manual for the time being, but we are looking at creating an IT solution, and I'm working with IT, and it's not just for sort of one or two areas. We're looking at sort of the whole regulatory system and how we can create efficiencies and reduce burden and try and reduce that the email traffic that goes back and forth, and have, I guess, like that one point of contact. So it is something we are really aware of, but the reality is at the moment we're a new organisation, and we've had to set up our organisation's IT rather than sort of this IT, and we haven't been able to develop it until we've got the conditions in place, but we are really aware of it, and it's something that we really are pushing for as well. So we are on your side with that.
So we've actually got a conversation next week about kind of a CRM system. So, you know, we'll kind of mull over that one, but that's a really good point, Grant.
We'll definitely add it to our submission times 10. Gail.
Yeah, that'll give us some power if we want to ask for a budget for something. So thank you.
And hopefully by the time we go through the first annual assurance, I think you've said it's December 27, then it'll be in place.
It'll be 28.
Is it December? 28, is it? Right, okay.
Yeah. I mean, for everyone else, it'll be 27, but
right, okay.
For you,
maybe 28. I mean,
this is all subject to whether we have issues with the timing of the conditions, and that's, as a legal question, we're kind of going to be asking our lawyers. But you know, it's really, unless there's a problem in that space, it will be 2028, and you know, we'll obviously we'll keep you posted on that. But I don't foresee any problems. Any other questions, points, comments? It's been really helpful. Thank you.
Sorry, Sam and I are having our own personal conversation here on chat.
Yeah, no, so in the equality of opportunity space, you've got that participation, continuation, the awarding kind of gaps, all of this. I mean, we already know that that's a bit of a tricky one because it's sort of complete or not. So it's anything about that proportionality and what it means specifically in relation to these being employed learners, very specific as you can be. I will certainly then do my best to ensure that that then is embedded so you can see that context being applied and the proportionality, but the more you can give me, the better that can land, basically.
What I would say, I mean, is the consultation's running till the 17th. If you think of anything else after this, please get in touch. You know, we need another quick chat with any one of you. Fine, happy to do that. Just I'm conscious that diaries are looking nuts, but you know, still happy to flex as much as we can. So
from my point of view, I think we're prepared to give some high level feedback on the framework as it currently stands. I think, as with anything, the devil is in the detail, and when you actually start looking at how this will work in specific scenarios. So, you know, I'm confident that although we'll give high level feedback, you're engaging with us so that we can move it forward. And again, it may change in 2 years' time, but yeah, I think the feedback we will be giving is high level stuff in the first instance.
Yeah, I think we're going to need to do some kind of workshops and stuff actually with different bits of the sector as about what it really means. Once this is all kind of finalized, we can then sort of digest it a bit and kind of we can have conversations about how on the ground it might work for different and implications. I mean, if you think about kind of FE, you know, they've got issues with governors and kind of how do they, you know, do they need training? Is there anything we need to do in that space? So there's kind of all sorts of questions like that, some practical stuff. So I think we need to probably have some workshops to kind of, you know, in a few months' time to kind of digest some of this and kind of work about practical implications. And you know, I'd really appreciate if we can kind of come to you and try and sort something nearer the time, and because I think your kind of input in terms of the practical stuff will be critical, and any implications as well, you know, how we can kind of get over them. So yeah, as I said, we want to be pragmatic about this. We're not going to be just like this is our way or the highway kind of thing. It's gonna, you know, if there's a way, if there are kind of ways we can make it work by just sort of being clear about what we mean about certain things, and you know, perhaps flexing a bit on some of these things, then yeah, let's have those conversations. But you know, I found this really, really helpful. Has anyone got any comments or questions?
Ewan, I just popped in the chat, really. I think that would be really useful because inevitably, you know, albeit the consultation is completed, but following that, there'll be different varying levels of understanding, etc., and then implementation as well, you know. So a lot of it won't be new to ITPs, etc., but then there will be some that are, and then as Faith and Grant have just said, you know, it's about us stepping through that, if you like. So those that offer of workshops and doing that collectively together post it would be really helpful.
So colleagues might be cursing me now saying that. The other thing actually as well, between sort of the close of the consultation and when we kind of finalize stuff, if there's stuff in your responses where we think, look, can we just have a quick conversation? Are you happy for us to come back to you and kind of pick stuff up if needed? Because it might be sort of like, well, we're thinking of changing it to look like this. Would this work? You know, so if we can have that kind of two-way, I mean, I can't promise. We'll see where we get timescales, but if we can do that, that would be great. So brilliant. Sorry, I saw a hand up a second ago. Is that you, Grant?
That was me for my thumbs up to your comment then. So
fab.
I think
Yeah.
I think we'd welcome that, Ewan, to be honest.
Yeah. Great. So what's the time? I think we were envisaging this would take an hour and a half, so I think we're almost there. You're gonna have, I can let you have 3 minutes back.
Can I just go full circle, Ewan? Where I jumped on, where I jumped on the start about the link. So thank you for Andrew for sending through the link. I've clicked on that. That absolutely does work. Thank you for that. But I've also gone back into the document which the link is embedded in, and that still is showing closed.
Okay.
So I don't know what the problem is, but as long as you're aware of it, because there could be people like me trying to click on the one in the document and it ain't working. That may be a broken link at my end. I don't know, but I thought I'd make you aware of it again.
Thank you, Gareth. That's really, really helpful.
If you could let me know which document, Gareth, and then I can have a look into it.
It's the consultation document with the introduction and what have you, and you've got the embedded link in there saying closing date of the 17th of December, and you click on the link then to get to the survey. It was working this morning because I went in, but it wasn't working later this afternoon.
I will have a look. Thank you, Gareth.
Okay.
Maybe it's given up because it's a Friday.
Yeah, could be. Ewan, can I just thank you on behalf of obviously NTfW and my colleagues as well, because inevitably we had the opportunity to come to the consultation events. I couldn't make the southern one, but you know, it was really welcomed, and obviously just from our end, the collaboration and support that we've had from you guys across the team, really, any questions or queries that I've sort of submitted on behalf of the ITPs have been really supported. So I just really want to thank you for that, because inevitably you have these consultations. We had a similar one with the apprenticeship program as well, you know, and we had really good discussions on that, and Heather came to the board meeting as we've had today this afternoon's, and I know your diaries are like ours, very stretched at the moment, so just really appreciate it. It's nice to sound things out sometimes rather than just having to read something and respond, so it is nice to be able to shout things out, and obviously Ewan, you know, I can always come to you as well if there are any additional queries. So much appreciated.
Please do. And, you know, I'd rather you came to us and asked. If you're not sure about something, just drop us a line and you know, come to me directly or go through regulation advice. You know, happy either way, really. Just, yeah, get in touch if you've got any points, and we'll find the right person to answer. If it isn't me, then we'll find someone. Thank you ever so much. We'll have a great weekend and hope to see you all soon.
You too.
Cheers.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.